We are so blessed to have Stephen Cantu here, and he is, lives in Bonita. He's been a master gardener since 2008 and a wheelchair user. And he's going to tell you much more about this. Since 1982, he's taken his experience as a gardener and a wheelchair user to develop a program called FIG, Friendly Inclusive Gardening. So what I loved about everything that he said to me is gardening is gardening. It's just, for everybody, it's, you just make your way to how you can do it. So please welcome Stephen Cantu.
Well, thank you guys for the privilege coming to these meetings. Well, not here, but I was at the fairgrounds 2 years back, and I enjoyed the heck out of them. So anyway, here I am, and as said, I'm a master gardener since 08, and when I got into the program, I had no idea what I was getting into. I thought, okay, we're gonna take some classes and learn a few things and get back a little information, but then I discovered all the programs and all the opportunities, and then I realized a lot of guys and master gardeners and in the community just don't understand the whole thing dealing with, say, disabilities and in gardens and so on. So I developed this program called FIG, Friendly Inclusive Gardening. But before we get started, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about me. Back in 1982, I was injured in a job site accident, and I fell about maybe a little over 3 stories off a bridge project. Ended up breaking a bunch of body parts, tibia and a femur and the pelvis and a couple ribs in my back in 3 places. Doctors took one look at me and said, oops, forget about walking, buddy, this is it, So, okay, so that was my...
Tired of being a champion.
Yeah. Okay, so anyway, I got in sports and I traveled around looking at gardens from around the world and so on. Then got into the San Diego Master Gardeners, and I realized that a lot of San Diego Master Gardeners and a lot of people in the community didn't have a good idea of dealing with the gardens in an aging population, and then combining with, say, if you want to garden with your grandson or great-grandson or whatever it is, then how do you mix it up with, say, kids, older adults, and then maybe people with disabilities? So I looked at all those areas and put together this program. And so we'll get into it. And uh-oh. Okay, so in the program, and in some of these pictures like this are part of my garden in Bonita, and I have a couple acres down there, which is about 1.75 acres too much. Not a couple years ago, I put down these paths, and basically these paths are road based, and on top of that, I'm going to put down DG, and maybe because DG is pretty expensive, this stuff is cheap. And so that's the way I worked it.
And you get it from where, kind
road base, I don't, I had an asphalt guy come to the house doing some asphalt work on me. And I said, can you go get this? And he did it. So I don't know really where he went.
No, I want to know.
But can your wheelchair go down on that road base?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And you don't get rocks caught?
No. But once I get the DG down, it'll be a lot easier. We're going to talk about that. So we'll talk about path of travel, which is this path of travel. Materials and practical design, signage and tools of the trade, and universal principles. Universal principles are something that the architects developed a while back, and it's for the Americans with Disabilities Act, and they just have some really neat things that they talk about. And once I discovered that, a lot of this came into focus, so we'll get into it. Let's get some audience participation. Somebody want to read what is an accessible garden? Anybody?
Sure.
Okay.
What is an accessible garden design? An enabled garden will use concepts such as raised garden beds, modified tools, and wider paths to achieve both accessibility and functionality. The ultimate goal is to have a garden which can be employed by everyone from the very young to the very old and blind and wheelchair user.
When I found, thank you. When I found this statement, the last line said, even a wheelchair user. And so I edited that out. I edited that as well. Oh, let me go back. Oh, come on. Okay, so, I'm gonna show you some oddities and stuff, some of which I come across, some of it I haven't, but this is what kind of happens when you leave humans to their imagination.
But how many acres did you say you have?
Just over 2. And so somebody put in a nice ramp here, another person thought, hey, it'll look good, let's have some flowers. So it defeats the purpose of the ramp, and you'll see more of that. Now, just so you know, a ramp should be for every inch of rise, you have 20 inches of run, or approximately 8 degrees is sort of ramp. Obviously, that's more than 8 degrees.
That's a skateboard ramp.
Yeah, that's basic suicidal. And of course, the stupidity of the lift is obvious. And of course, I've run into this quite a bit. And what I do when I run into something like that, I stand out in the front and throw pebbles at the window to get their attention. They have to come to me to
There
bring
you
them
go.
around.
How about that?
Yeah.
That's another good skateboard ramp.
Some of this stuff, you just don't have words for.
Is that in a medical office building, Jonathan?
Yeah,
These are funny.
it's just stupidity.
The city did that for us.
I was giving my presentation and the person could read Japanese, Chinese, whatever it is. And they say, yep, that says path. So, yeah. Now, on your path of travel, it is important to have a good, easy rolling surface. I'm against pea gravel, gorilla hair, and wood chips in the path of travel. Now, with that said, if those things are beaten down into the ground and only about 1 inch thick, it's not so bad. But something like this, it just doesn't work. Now, on my path of travel in my home, and you see, I like sharp, pointy things. I grew up in the Imperial Valley, and we used to go in the desert and see cactus, and it's just what I like. And I was fortunate enough that a friend of mine in Chula Vista grew all sorts of plants, mainly South African, Madagascar, and Canary Island plants is what he liked. And he said, Steve, do you want some? I said, sure. And he gave me like a truckload, pickup truckload. And I put them in, and he liked what he saw, and I've gotten 5 or 6 truckloads since then. So 1/3 of an acre was put in at very little cost. So I did all this for under 10 grand. So I thought that was pretty fortunate. Okay, so the path of travel, there are certain things you want to keep in mind. One is from where you park your car, because we all know we love to go shopping for plants. So where you park your car to your garden, your path of travel needs to be a good flat with no tripping objects. Things are clear, things are clean. And I say that, but I don't necessarily practice it because it's very difficult. You say, oh yeah, I want that nice and clean, but somebody calls you away, you leave a shovel or something, you'll path of travel.
This is what they're seeing.
But just
The small thing.
I don't know what to do about that.
Oh, there's a way to make it big.
You gotta do slideshow.
It's in slideshow.
Isn't there something at the top of the screen?
It's an apple, I think.
New slideshow.
There.
There.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, you have to do it in the Zoom feature too.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so path of travel. From where you park your car to where your garden is, because we all know we like to carry things from one point to the other. And then from your garden to your garden shed, that path needs to be free and barrier free, no tripping hazards, none of that. And I'll talk a lot about that because I carry stuff on my lap. You guys carry a lot of things like this, and you have to know where your feet are and avoid tripping. One of my master gardener friends' mother went out in the garden and she was in her, I think she was in her 80s, high 80s or 90s, tripped over a garden hose, ended up breaking a shoulder and a hip and so on. So it's really important that you don't fall. Okay, and also it is important to have a clear path from your garden, and this is particularly important with kids, to restrooms or areas that get cleaned up or wherever. So you got to keep all that in mind. As I was saying, my let's see if that's these paths here are as I was saying, it was road base, and then later I'll put down DG on top and it'll make it even smoother. But when you put this stuff down and you're putting DG down, it needs to be about 3 inches thick, and it has to be confined in an area so it doesn't run away from you. And the other thing that we want to talk about, and this is a mistake I made, is mainly because I didn't think some of my cactuses would grow that quickly. And I was really wrong. And so pointy, sharpy things like these choyas right here, and some of this other stuff, kind of goes into the path. And what was it, last summer? I was out in my garden and I was looking out ahead, and a form of yucca kind of fell into the path and I wasn't paying attention. And it caught me right here. And I looked down, I was bleeding all over the place. So it's important to keep that in mind, to keep those guys away from the path. And I was doing a zoo tour a few months ago, and they were saying all those plants that are poisonous or sticky, they move them quite away from the path. So it's something to keep in mind.
Can I ask how you weed that some type of an area like that?
How do I weed?
Yeah, when I look at this.
Oh, that is such a problem. Sometimes we're weeding for 4 months out of the year,
That's.
but we put down pre-emergent.
Yeah.
That really helps.
Okay.
I'm trying to get away from Roundup and use 30% vinegar. That seems to help quite a bit on the large leafy plants. Some of the things that won't help on, you just got to get out there and do it. Okay, so let's talk about around the garden. You can see here that this distance is fairly tight. We got what I call tripping stones on there. And this garden is obviously, I picked it because it was in the process and it had a bunch of garbage in it. So the distance between the raised beds needs to be about 5 feet. If your lot will permit that, do it, because if you put down a wheelbarrow and you need to get around it, you need the space. And particularly if you have kids, or if you're in a school garden or a community garden where lots of people are moving around, you need the space. So that's why I say 5 feet is really important. Here, see if this works. Yeah, this spot right in here. What I see here is a real problem, because somebody's standing there trying to do their work and stand up, step back, and you trip over those little beds on the side. So it's important. The other thing is you're dealing with kids, and I know this because I used to be that 10-year-old boy. If they gave me a shovel, it was anything but a shovel. Yeah. And so you need room. You guys all remember back in the day where they had duck and cover. Yeah. So you give a kid a shovel and he's as active as I was, you need room to duck and cover and get out of the way. That kid in the shovel, you know? So that's why for school gardens and community gardens, it's really important to have that space that you can step back away and have the room to give a lecture or whatever. If you're working with your grandkids at home, still, you need the space. Now, there are things here that also are problematic, like you got a pot there that shouldn't be there because it restricts the plants, and you got whatever that is in the garden hose, and all these things create obstacles in the garden that can hurt. So that's why I promote that. Now, here in the school garden, and I don't know if any of you guys volunteer at school gardens or not, but I go to school gardens and help them design and set up their gardens. If you look here, you got this guy here sitting down. So I assume that the height of these beds are somewhere close to, but not quite, 20 inches or so. And it's okay for kids. You know, kids are pretty bulletproof and, you know, so that's fine. But for instance, we're looking at this woman sitting over here. I bet you next morning she's gonna have some back issues. So we'll talk a little more about heights. The other thing you gotta keep in mind is these beds are on asphalt, painted asphalt. So you water the beds, you got a little bit of soil, you see down here, you have a little bit of soil coming out. Those can all be a slipping hazard. So it's something to keep in mind, the surface and how you design the beds and how the drainage works. So there's, for kids, this is pretty decent, nice design, but for an adult, almost impossible, particularly older adults. Now, most of us, and I know I can't, and I think I have a fairly decent income, but to put in something like this is really expensive. And so, but I'm using that because you got these little seating areas here and in here. And we've all had, how do you say this? You all had to, at some point, pull somebody aside and say, let's have a conversation. And that's just human nature. And to have it in the garden where, you know, stress levels can be a little lower just because gardens do that. And it's nice to have a seating area off to the side where you can have a private little conversation. And that's why that's important. And in particular, in school gardens is important. I helped set up a school garden in Bonita that was for troubled kids. They were one step away from going to juvenile hall. And they used the garden as a reward and also a chill area. And it worked out really nice, and to have an area where you could pull the kids aside and have talks with them was really beneficial. It worked out really well. But the county came in and said, no, I don't like this garden. They ripped it out and they put in some storage sheds. Well, okay, that's the way it goes. Now, one of the architectural ideas is to have the access to your property where it draws you in. And this kind of does that. Nice seating areas, nice flat walkway, draws you into the door. All perfect, all nice, but let's look at it from a different perspective. Where does your eyes go? To the red door, right? And so you just visualize yourself walking to the red door, talking to a friend, and do you see those tripping hazards right there? Yeah. And I bet you most of you guys didn't see that right away. You saw the red doors. And so that's something to be aware of. Plants that are put in, it looks great, but plants that are put in like that creates tripping hazards. And so it's something to keep in mind, but it's gorgeous, but it could be dangerous. And here's another one, absolutely gorgeous. But these little stones are uneven. And lots of times, I carry things on my lap. I'll go a few feet on a situation like this, I gotta readjust. And you guys may be carrying a plant like this, and say you have a box of choyas that you're carrying somewhere. And your feet, you can't see your feet and you trip. Okay, I don't need to say any more about choices. No, but you see the point. Now, what are all these things? Why borrow? First of all, do you want your friends and neighbors to know that you consume that much wine? Well, yeah, okay. But most of us garden, and I see a lot of shoes here that are not necessarily warranted to use if you're around broken glass. And a lot of people I know are gardening in flip-flops and say, you know, light shoes, which are fine, but if somebody breaks one of those bottles, that could ruin your day. So I strongly promote the idea of getting rid of anything that's gonna hurt you.
Yeah.
But let's talk the rest about this. So you have here, pea gravel. And I think I mentioned that pea gravel and, wood chips and gorilla hair are really difficult in the garden, to roll on. So anything that's on wheels, wheelbarrow, wheelchairs, mama pushing a child in a stroller, or walkers, or, you know, electric chairs, or, you know, whatever. And it is also more difficult to walk on stuff like that. Like I said, if it's real shallow, not that big of a problem. But if it's deep, it takes your energy to go away. For me to push my chair, takes about 7% more energy than it does to just walk. So anything like that creates more of a problem, yeah? So keep in mind, who's gonna use your garden? You know, what are they gonna be doing in it, and so on. So your path of travel is set up accordingly. Now here, there's also very little room to get in, to do the maintenance and so on. The good part is here, you got a nice seating area. You got a bit of a tripping hazard right here, but that, you know, but here, a nice seating area. Now let's talk about this trellis work here. I really like these things, particularly if you have something growing over them like grapes or whatever. But lots of times, I carry stuff across my lap like this. So you come to something like that, you know, you hit it, you gotta readjust and so on. So it's taking up time and space and so on. So keep in mind, if you put in something like that, make it wide enough and so you can get through it without readjusting and causing you to have, take up more energy in your garden practice. Another place that is just absolutely stunning and gorgeous, of course, they have the pea gravel, which, okay. But the other thing that people don't think about, you put in plants that work into your path of travel. And if you have things like zucchinis and all those sort of vine stuff, you gotta pick it up and be careful not to break it, move it out of the way, and then continue on your path of travel. The other thing is, it's covering up a number of these raised beds. And I've seen people trip over stuff like that because they don't think about it. So it's important to keep things, and I'll talk about vertical gardening, which brings a lot of that stuff out of the path of travel. But it's gorgeous, but yeah, functionality, it's a different thing. Know your materials. So we all know why treated woods are used. It's, you know, longevity in the garden and so on. When I was in the trades, and I worked with this stuff all the time, I built homes and I built bridges and I built all sorts of stuff, you know? And I would get splinters. For me, it's really not a problem. I just, you know, take a knife and dig it out and not worry about it. But for somebody who may have some sort of immune deficiency stuff, that could be deadly. So I have moved away from using treated materials and been using more metal beds. And they seem to work out just as well, and they last just as long. And they're cheaper than putting in the wood products. Now, I'm told that a 4x8 wood bed is close to $500 in materials. Then you need the skill and the equipment to build it. Where you can drop down a metal bed and away you go. And we'll have some pictures of that later. Now, railroad ties. Don't use railroad ties, period. They're a nuisance and they're very difficult to haul around and to cut. And I know this because I've done it. And it's just a mess. And people would say, and I've heard this many times when people are well educated about gardens, they don't transfer through the soil to the plants. Okay, that's fine. But if you're touching these things that has cancer-causing agents on it, then you're touching your food, you got a problem. And what I noticed on the ones I had years ago, when they're hot in the sun, the creosote starts bubbling out of them. That's bad. Particularly when you're dressed up to go somewhere and my wife says, hey, I'll be 15 minutes. You think, I'll go out in the garden. next thing you know, you got all dirty on that stuff, you know. But there's more things to unpack on this picture. You see this little concrete strip here? And then you got a lawn here. It's always been, for me, you're sitting at two different levels. The lawn is always lower than the concrete strip. So your feet may be up like this, and you're leaning forward into the bed. And for me, I'm sitting sideways, and I'll be having to lean like this to make up the difference. And I already have some back issues that makes that difficult. So try not to have a concrete strip around your garden beds because it makes different angles. The other thing to unpack is over here, we have a small walking area with a tripping hazard being garden hose. And what I've noticed on these U-shaped raised garden beds, and everybody thinks this is a great idea, you can work on both sides. But you get into it and you can't turn around. You have to back out. And you back out and you found the tripping hazard, away you go. And this has happened to me, so I know. So it's something to keep in mind. And of course, around the back here, you can't even get to that area. So, you know, it looks fair, but functionality is really what you want to develop. Okay. This is one of these gardens that was set up next to a restaurant, and they would get their products and take it in and cook it up and charge 10 times extra because they do it themselves, which is okay. So here we got wide beds, we got DG down, and that's what I promote, is putting DG down. Particularly if it has the amendment in it. Stabilizer.
Yeah.
For some reason, that word doesn't always come up, but it's a stabilizer. Unfortunately, it almost doubles the price. So there's other options, and take some research and find out. And some you can spray on later, do it yourself. Some you can mix it yourself. A lot of work. So maybe you want to just pay the extra amount. But good stuff, allows water to penetrate through into the ground. And I've been working on that stuff when it's been wet out. And it really drains the water through and you don't create mud. So it works out pretty well. But the deal about the barn door here, I really like that idea. They're not as secure as a regular shut door that you can lock. But think about this, and you're going up to your storage shed, you can just move it open, and then if you got a ramp, you just hop up on the ramp and go on in. That's easy. Whereas you got a door, you got to come up, open the door, move back, and then leave the door open. If there's a breeze, comes and shuts on you. This I think just works a little nicer from my standpoint. Oops, did I do that? Okay, so on these beds, this is a different garden, but it's basically similar. Let's talk about controllers. I have two controllers, and at one point I had 3, and I had over 40 valves around the property, which was impossible to remember what valve went where. So it's really important to take notes and hang these notes by your controller, and the controller needs to be at eye level, whatever height you are, so it'll be easy to work. The other thing that I strongly recommend, lots of times people put their valves down in the ground level. So you gotta get down there, work on it. And what I've always noticed with the valves in the ground in a box, they always get bees, ants, spiders, whatever in there. And it's always been a nuisance. So in my house, I put all my valves about this high. And I have each one of I take that back. I tried to number each one of the boxes for raised beds. And then around the gardens have numbers around that I can easily see, that's garden 9, that's number 10, that's whatever. And then I can easily go back to my controller and work it. But I bought 2 controllers and I set them up for Wi-Fi. So right from here, I can pick up my phone, type in my particular box I want to work, and say, turn this one on. And that works out great. And that's probably why I have a $500 or $600 or $700 water bill coming in. But it's really beneficial to have each of the beds numbered and each of the valves numbered. And then also you put that list of numbers next to your controller. And you can send somebody in there if you don't want to use your phone and just say, hey, kid, turn on this. And that also works really good with kids to have your shovels, your rakes and so on numbered in your garden shed. And you can tell the kid, hey, go get me shovel number 5 if you remember those numbers. And then it goes back on that place for number 5. So that is, for maintenance and for keeping things clean, it's really important to keep that organization going. So vertical gardening. Now this guy here, I think that tomato plant is a little high. He's kind of reaching back. I would lower it a little bit, but you can see how much easier that is to work. Because most people, this area right here is what's comfortable to work in. Out a couple feet this way and this way. And that's what you want to set up with your garden, so you're not straining, and definitely not on ladders. I don't use ladders, obviously. And but I've had a number of friends who've had issues with that falling off. And when I was in rehab, I had a guy sitting in my room, who's the next bed over, who kept saying over and over again, I hate apricots. And finally I asked him, what's the deal with apricots, man? And he was a migrant farm worker who was picking apricots and fell off the ladder, and it actually had arthritis in his lower back, and it caused him to be a paraplegic because it pinched off his spinal cord when he fell off the ladder. So these things are something to keep in mind. I mean, it's a sad story. The guy was in the 70s, and it was problematic for him. So stay off of ladders. And this is more vertical gardening. I think that's his garden art. I just really like the way that looks. It's a little more work to do that. You got to tie these guys up and so on, but it saves a lot of space, and you can get good productivity, and you can easily see what's what. Keeping critters out. What's it been? About 10 years ago, I was in Zimbabwe, and we were also in South Africa and Botswana. But in Zimbabwe, I was talking with this guy. We visited his little dry farm, and he was giving us a lecture on his gardens and his other things that he was doing. And I noticed his garden, which was fairly good size, had these humongous barriers around it. And I said, what's the story? And he said, well, I got a problem with warthogs, zebras, and elephants. And I had to bite my tongue, because at that point, I was having a problem with bunnies. And so it was kind of like, they're not saying anything. And my neighbor, just before I left on that trip, was telling me about his bunnies, and he would just shoot the bunnies, take them in the kitchen, make up some rabbit stew. But if you shoot an elephant in your garden, that's the beginning of your problem. So everybody has their critters, and everybody's got to keep things safe from the critters. My niece, who has an operation in Patagonia, Arizona, a wildlife restoration program where they take plants out and they restore areas. And she has a real problem with pickery. And what they call skunk pigs, because they have a gland in their back that's a real problem. Try to make sausage out of those things. Really sneaky. But they're good sized animals, and they like to root through the gardens. In Mammoth, where I spend my summers, my friends who garden up there have a real problem with black bears, and which is a real nuisance. So those guys are smart and strong. And I actually have seen them in fruit trees, just tearing the heck out of them. And so that's a real problem. And then in Central California, again, they have a problem with the pickeries up there. So you got to adjust your garden for the critters that are trying to eat all your products. In Bonita, I have a real problem with your basic rats. And most people do. Southern California rats are just ongoing. But so, okay, let's look at this guy up here. I saw this and at first I thought, oh, that's really a neat idea. But then I thought, okay, wait a minute now. You gotta lift up that lid, reach down, get that 2x4 and then put it in place. For a lot of people who don't have good trunk balance, that's a real problem. Shut that off.
All aboard?
Yeah. So this thing here is a real nuisance, and just think about this. You got that thing in place, you stick your head in there, and here comes that kid with the shovel. Who thinks it's a little bit of a slugger. And you got a problem. Yeah? So I built this thing for my wife. And these are some of the beds that I have in my garden up here. And these were I got from Epic Gardening. And so I built this thing thinking that when my grandkids are here, you don't have to worry about, because small hands can get pinched and you get aptitude problems real quick. So I built the doors that open up like this. And
Do
I
they
have it on
fold
both.
flat?
I'm sorry?
Do they open flat?
Yes.
Oh, so
They
you
open
won't
up.
bump into
Yeah,
it?
so then you can get in there, and these beds are roughly 6x4. And so the general idea is that if you get all the way around the bed, then 4 foot wide's not a problem. Because most people reach in, 1.5 feet, 2 feet, and so on, and that's perfect for me. But if you only can get to one side, then I recommend 2 foot wide beds. Yeah, so, and then, okay, you see my wife sitting down here, and if you can see the height of this bed and roughly where her, at her waist level. So she can walk right up to the bed and not have to bend over to aggravate any lower back issues. Do anything she wants within that, 2 foot range and go around the other side and do it. And that's working out real well for Jen. So, that's something to keep in mind. And so what I did was, because the beds weren't quite high enough, I built this platform underneath the bed. And I built it in such a way that there's a toe kick in it. I don't know if you can see that there. So you walk up to it and you can get real close and get your feet underneath the beds. And it's been there a few years and it's holding up really well. What I put on top of the wood was some plywood covered in pond liner. So that way the wood doesn't get affected by the moisture. And then on the corners and in between, I put a couple bricks down. So the wood would, the water would drain away from them. And it's, it's holding up well. The only issue that's coming up is lizards love to hang out underneath that thing that drives my dog crazy. Which is fine. Yeah. But anyway, that's the way it goes.
And your irrigation, where do you run your irrigation? Is that underneath with the wood or?
No,
It's metal.
let me go back here.
or put on the
I, oh,
platform?
come on.
It's all right.
My timer box is about 50 to 70 feet away. And I ran a line from there all the way up and it kind of buried in places. And then it drip lines come up the backside and it just wraps around the inside. And we just use commonly known as spaghetti pipe or funny pipe in there. And that seems to be working out pretty well. At first, I had a big argument with my wife as to how to do it. And she won, of course, and we did it that way. And the other
You can
thing
reach
is,
into them yourself personally from your chair easily?
oh yeah, it works out just fine for me. The other thing, the reason we put all this stuff by the pool area, which is really outside of my kitchen, and because of all the concrete, it stays a lot warmer in that area. And plants seem to do they seem to grow a lot easier than where I had them before, which was about 70 feet away from my kitchen. And if I needed something, I said, oh, I don't want to go all the way up there, So now it's fairly close in. I had some plants in the front of the property that weren't doing very well. And I dug them up and brought them in, and this was citrus, and put them on the concrete. They love the heat. They do a lot better. Okay, anything else here? No, okay.
They have wheels.
No, these don't have wheels. On some of my other bands, I put wheels on them thinking that that would be beneficial. But it turns out, once you get them full of soil and water, gets really heavy. And you need two strong people to move it around. So it doesn't happen. Now, this is Hollywood Gardens down in National City. These guys do a really great job on a lot of things, but they had some problems with accessibility. And I went and talked with them, and we worked out a lot of issues. Of course, you see here with the wood chips, it was difficult to roll on. And what happens with, this is an accessible area to do, wash up your vegetable, wash your hands and so on. What happens is, it doesn't get used every day, it gets cluttered. And so that's a bit of a nuisance. So you have to move stuff out of the way to do things. A lot of times people say, forget it. I'm not gonna deal with it. And then this is what happens a lot of times. This sign talks about accessible beds, but it blocks out your access to that accessible bed. And that's very typical. I see stuff like that happen quite a bit. And again, these things all kind of blocks out your accessibility. So a lot of times what people don't think about, when you get underneath these things, there's a lot of spiders underneath there. And I've experienced over the years that I found black widows running around on my legs. And then I just kind of ran that. But somebody who has limited sensation and wearing short pants, that could be a real problem. So I get under my these areas at my place, and I will spray some insecticide in there, or bugs, whatever it is, to make sure that stays clean.
What garden is that again? You said it.
Hollywood, down National City.
Okay.
They do a fabulous job on so many levels, teaching people
Yeah, I
about.
was reading about it last night, so
Yeah,
okay, just want to be sure.
That's not enough knee space under that stink.
No, probably isn't, yeah, but it's there and it works, and since I've worked with them, well, I haven't been there in over a year, but let's just say they did a pretty good job on that. Now, Espelate, I've been doing this in a couple of my areas, and it works out pretty well. Doesn't look this good, and it doesn't work very well for pomegranates. For some reason, I don't know why. But my figs, I have it on a flat area, and it's they're getting a little tall. We have to cut it back. But this works out really good to get up close to the stuff and pick your fruit and so on. It's just a good, easy way to have access to it. The problem is keeping the clutter down, and again, what do you see on the ground there? Yeah. So a person that's using any mobility devices, that may be difficult. But it cuts down the quantity of the fruit, but the quality, I think, goes up when you do something like this. And of course, here's another way of doing that. These are pears over here, and it looks like lemons here. But it's another way of getting good access to your product. And of course, hydroponics is another way that you can grow a lot of things and get up close to it without a lot of issues. So if you got the time to have a little chemistry experience, that's a good way to go. And of course, I really like the idea of getting fresh herbs from my garden, from my kitchen cooking. These things need to be close to your kitchen though, because many times I'll be cooking away and the recipe says fresh, whatever. Oh man, I don't want to go all the way out there, to get that. So have these things close in. The other thing that these things are really good for, you may think you want a big garden. So you start out small, then add till you get to your comfort zone. I have a big garden, over 40 fruit trees, and a whole bunch of other things. And it's really overwhelming. And I have people help me because nobody without help can do that. Even you know, an able-bodied person who spend all their time out there. Now, this is just a fun idea that kids like. I wouldn't put this in, but it's kind of, I just think it's kind of fun. But if you look closely, it's hard to see. All these gourds and pumpkins and so on are actually tied up there with a rope. For a guy like me to try to get something like that down, it would be almost impossible. I make a joke about not putting a blind guy in this thing. But you know, it's kind of neat. I like these ideas. At Hollywood Gardens, you guys know how quickly passion fruit grows. You can almost sit there and watch it grow. They have a tunnel set up, and the kids just love running through that thing and picking the fruit and so on. So it's a way to get kids in there and, you know, mess around with different things. Now, garden accessories. I built something like this for a friend of mine who helped me out with my project, and she would sit on it, but it has more of a purpose than just sitting on it. Now, I don't know if this happened to you guys, but it happens to me all the time. I'll be messing around in my garden or in my wood shop or whatever, and somebody will say, hey, you know, Steve, come on over here, let's talk about something. So 20 minutes later, I go back and I'm like, oh, where did I put that tool? You know, where did I drop? What was I doing? And by putting the, you can put your water bottle on there, so you can put on the tools that you're using, and it keeps it in plain sight. Okay, so we talked about that, and now practical design ideas. You don't have to have expensive beds in your garden. I mean, they look nice, they're practical and so on, but other alternatives work also well. So these guys have these kind of industrial looking bends and soil and put stuff in them. You know, and for a school garden, why not? You know, and these little livestock containers, you know, for livestock for water or food or whatever, they work pretty good too. This little guy you see right here is actually a hose bib. And what I did on mine, and my beds were a little taller, I put a hose bib in there, and then put a plastic tube on it. And I brought the tube up. So I would fill the beds up with water, and you can see the water in that tube. So you know when you got enough water in there. Let everything hydrate. Then I brought the tube down, and it drained into a bucket. And then I took that water and used it somewhere else. So it's something to do. These things, last I checked, was $100 and some a bed. And the ones I have were like 3 feet by 2 feet wide. Where if you were to build that out of cedar or whatever, you're talking a couple $100 in materials. So the big advantage with these things is pop them down, fill it full of soil, start doing your gardening right now.
But the big long beds, you're talking, are the tubs?
I'm talking about the beds.
Okay, I have one of those, I call them horse troughs.
Yep.
And it takes so much dirt.
Everything, no matter what you build, that size is gonna take so many cubic feet of soil.
But then I should keep it. I was gonna get rid of it, but I should keep it to use.
Well, they work, as long as it isn't rusting away, use it. Because if you're gonna build something out of wood, it's gonna cost you hundreds of dollars. Yeah.
So what is the bottom? What's the bottom?
Well, some of these beds don't have a bottom.
Okay,
The ones that are livestock do,
okay.
and they're all galvanized. So you don't want to drill into them because under the galvanized is steel, and that will start rusting.
Okay.
Yeah. So what's the name of that company? Tractor Supply.
Yeah.
They sell a lot of this stuff. Also, City Farmers sell some of these things. So it's something to look at. Now, as a master gardener, I can't endorse any company. But we'll check it out, see what works for you.
Did you say that they don't drain the troughs?
The trough, until you either unplug that drain hole.
Oh, right, okay.
Now, adaptive raised beds, for guys like me, these work pretty well, except you notice that the sides are sloped in. So around the edges, the soil is real thin, not deep at all. So what I've noticed on the one I have, plants going down the center do pretty well. Put them on the edges, not so well. The other disadvantage with these things is you're underneath it, you're watering with a hose because that's what you want to do. And next thing you know, you're soaking wet all the way down. So if you don't want to spend the time telling all your friends and neighbors that you got a bladder problem, you have to stand to the side and get a wand. And I really have a lot of those wands on my water hoses. So it would give you a much bigger reach. Oh, the other thing about this is in my title, Friendly Inclusive Gardening, I strongly recommend that a kid with a disability needs to be with the whole group. You don't isolate them, because I just hate that. And so having this isolated on its own, and the rest of the kids are working over there, over here, I got a real problem with that. So you need to have that incorporated into the entire garden without having them isolated. Now, I just got this thing, I like cave art. I just think, we call these guys primitive, but they did stuff like this, that's not primitive. And so garden art or cave art, these things were used for educational, for spiritual, religious purposes, conveying a message non-verbally. So now in our modern society, we have stuff like this, and it's important to have this type of stuff. But if you notice that if it's all clumped up here like this, it just becomes clutter. And so signage needs to be placed in the proper location, the proper size from where it's being visualized from, and it has to project the meaning non-verbally as to what you want somebody to do in case of whatever. So you keep that in mind. You're putting up signage, put it in a location where it's not covered by plants or other signage, and it is easily accessible. Okay, now sometimes people use Google Translate to say, put a sign in a different language for whatever group. And oops, I goofed up here. Anyway, this is the type of signage that I like to see in the garden. This is really important because, again, you get called away, you come back, and you forgot what you're doing. Is this carrots? Is this radishes? But having the kids make up something like this, you put it down, and then you know what you got there. Okay, back to the signage issue if you're using Google Translate or something. I agree. So now, with my computer, I use a dictate thing because I'm a lousy typist and my hands don't work as good as they used to. So I use dictate, which I consider to be an adaptive device that allows me to speak to my computer and get out words. And so a friend of mine sent me a nice poem dealing with accessibility issues in the garden. I read it. I wrote back to her verbally dictating, nice poem, thanks. What she received was, nice porn, thanks. So you got to pay attention to what you're doing, and how do you have a long, successful life? You pay attention to detail, and that applies to almost everything.
Where was that sign?
So
Where was that sign?
It's Halloween sign.
No, that's
the sign about the torture.
So I got a lot of these tools behind me. Hopefully we'll have time after this after everything. You can come up, take a look, try it out, so on. This guy here has a price. I wouldn't put much credence to that now. But a lot of these guys I have over here. Up here, this is a battery operated pruner.
There.
Oh, how did
As
it,
you were saying,
I love mine.
it works good though?
Yes.
Yeah.
it
Oh my
works
God,
well.
works
It
good.
doesn't know the difference between a branch and your finger.
Exactly.
So pay attention. Of course, you got this lady down here working on this raised accessible bed. The only issue, again, the watering issue, but because these things are so shallow, they dry out quickly. So you really gotta pay attention to that. These things up here, these work great. For a guy like me, I'll be on the ground flopping around like a trout. But, they work great for people if you have good core strength. My wife's favorite tool, and one of mine, is this plant mover. You get that on Amazon for $60. It works out really well. I also use it when my little propane containers need to be taken to the car and get filled up. I put it on that, push it out there, pick it up and so on. I used to just take those things and put them on my lap and run them to the car, but I'm getting to the age where that's not very good for my legs anymore. This guy down here, this is another favorite tool. Not only does it allow you to sit on it like that, but you turn it over and you can use it as a bench. And they're not that, it's $30-some. And they
The only thing is, because I have to reach too far, it starts to bother your thighs.
That's right.
I love mine, no.
Of course, we know about safety and using electric tools in the rain and so on. And of course, gloves, safety, keep all that in mind. Now, tools to avoid. If you're gonna need a pick or a digging bar in your garden, put it in a raised bed. The best use of these tools is teach a young person the value of a higher education. Because they are killer, particularly this digging bar. After I was using that a few years back to put in a fence line, I did it all. 2 o'clock in the morning, my arms were just throbbing because that vibration goes right up the arms. And so stay away from that stuff.
Or do like what I did when I put in my garden coop bed.
Yep.
I went over to Home Depot and hired a couple of those guys in the parking lot to do
Yeah.
that kind of stuff.
I've done that also, but then I got them at a good price. But what I had to pay to get my tools back kind of made up the difference.
I stayed with it the whole time.
Just a good idea. This thing here works out really handy. I wish I had one now. But to move your tools around, you got everything you need. This is just an inexpensive way to store some tools.
Okay, but you can get at a thrift store an old golf cart, old
Yep.
golf bag, and it'll work just like that.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah. Okay, so I have a 5-minute video here that kind of sums everything up. Now, sound. Uh-oh. Oh.
Silent.
Inclusive garden spaces. Master gardens.
Turn off your mic, I think.
Can you hear that?
Turn your mic
You gotta
off.
turn your mic off, it's getting.
Right, you're doing the right job. Inclusive for all levels of ability and age.
Okay, oh, I screwed that up. All right, so how do we resolve this? How do I turn the mic off?
Usually down on the bottom.
That's up the top, up the top.
Or maybe.
See right there, at the top, the top.
Oh, that's it is off. It's off.
He wants them to get the volume, us to get the volume.
And 7, size and stays for approaching use. Number 1, designing your space.
I don't know if you can hear that.
Speak of your age, your size, speak your physical abilities. You or your intended users be bringing in pets.
Well,
You
without,
did an excellent job, so don't worry.
Yeah.
You did.
Yeah.
this kind of sums everything up, and it talks about the 7 steps of accessibility in the garden and so on. All right. Oh, come on.
We love technology.
Yeah, technology's not our friend today, is it? Any questions?
Yes.
Okay,
When I say from before, you talked about gorilla grass, was it?
gorilla hair,
What is it?
shredded redwood bark.
Ah, okay.
Now, when I was giving my talk to, in Kansas City, to the International Master Gardener Convention, people came up and said, what is that? And I was just wondering, is that just a West Coast thing? I don't know. If anybody knows, let me know. 'Cause
Yeah, I've never seen the product.
Yes.
So with the emphasis on mulching and putting bark down, how do you make your garden good and also be accessible? I mean,
Well, DG is the product that, it's easy to roll on, easy to walk on. Expensive, but it's a good product and it allows the path of travel to be somewhat dry. And yet the water goes into the ground.
But you're still gonna have your mulch areas with your plants. like
Yeah,
your cactus.
Yeah, and you're actually planting beds, then the gorilla hair is really good. And the mulch is really good. Pea gravel, don't put it in your beds.
But something like forest fines is a lot better than chips.
What is it called?
Forest fines.
Forest fine.
Yeah, finer.
I'm not familiar with that product.
It's sort of really finely ground chips.
Oh, okay.
And I've been told I wouldn't use gorilla if I was doing cactus, because it leaches out something into the.
Well, a lot of
soil.
people say that you're not supposed to have a lot of nitrogen in your cactus garden. My cactus garden is in an old horse bed. And there was manure in there that I planted my cactus into, and my master gardener friend Steve, he said, Steve, that's not gonna work. Well, it's working. So,
Didn't you say earlier that they were growing so fast?
yeah, yeah. So I don't know what the story is with that,
That's just a bunch of.
but so be it. This is one area of the garden here that I'm just kind of barely working on, because I got enough to work on. But you can see how green and nice it is under, and people say you can't grow on the pepper tree. Well, there's a pepper tree. I got 28 pepper trees on the property. Weeds too. Not for sale, but you can definitely mess around with them and try them and so on. Any other questions?
Can we play with your tools?
Absolutely.
Yeah, you guys, I think that you wanna actually see these in action.
If you want to see more of my garden, you can just go to YouTube or go to Google, type in my name, Stephen Cantu, with a PH. And a video was made, it's about 35 minutes long, that Epic Gardens produced. And you can see the gardens, and it was really, it came out well. And so I was really proud of it.
Actually, if you do this, because I Googled, you told me to do this, and I did it, and several videos come up about him of varying lengths. But the one that's the longest and the most detailed is the one Epic Gardening has posted. So, but there's a Master Gardeners has posted a shorter one on theirs of you and their garden. It's about 5 or 6 minutes. So anyway, just keep looking for Epic Gardening for the 35-minute one.
Okay, so anybody wants to come up and look at tools, I'll be here. If not, that's okay.
Excellent, excellent.
Those on Zoom. Bye-bye.
Stephen, you enjoyed the talk. I'm a